Right. Okay, over to you. Bill, straight in.
Okay. My first question is for the professor, for Dan. I was actually really struck by your comment that actually Stanford doesn't compensate you in any way for doing all this work, and it's an enormous amount of work, I can imagine. And what that made me think about is that, the model that we have of these MOOC courses is the star professor model. A single, charismatic, knowledgeable, authoritative person creating this course single-handedly. Interestingly, two things. One is the online environment is an inherently collaborative medium and an inherently social medium. And ironically, textbooks, have always been an outstanding source of income for professors supplementing their salaries, textbook authorship. And textbook authorship has, for main core textbooks, has always been a very collaborative, multi-author sort of thing. So, to what extent do you see this model moving from a single individual putting this enormous amount of work in to create a course without really having any compensation for it, to maybe a more collaborative, ongoing model, which actually moves more toward that, establishment of a community sort of thing that you were talking about? But I could see some middle ground there, making it actually viable, not just for increasingly improving the course, but reducing the burden on an individual like you.
So the cost is all up front. I mean, putting it up the first time is a ton of work, you're right. But after that, supposedly it's going to be relatively easy, right? That I'll tweak and I'll just keep running this. And I've seen a lot of people run the same course again and again and again already. We're a little slower on that. But I've also seen a variety of cases where people license out their course to another university. For example, at another university, someone may be an awful teacher or get horrible teaching reviews, or they may not want to pay to have a course taught. So then the question is, can they license the Stanford course and use that? And there's actually cases where they will take a course, teach it in their class, and show up and just discuss the material that someone else presented. So it's feasible. There is, it's not just a textbook, but the actual course has a life of its own after that. I don't know what, right now, traditionally I've always just given away my course to other faculty, but now that it's public and has ownership issues, like the university claims to own my class, which is viable, right? That I don't necessarily own it. Now we have all kinds of issues about payment. So I think you're right. There are a lot of things there, and yes, I am considering like a textbook now. Whether that's sustainable, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of one of those things you try it, and hopefully as a first mover, I have a little better chances at kind of getting some value out of it. Okay, well,
just a quick follow-up. So it's interesting that you haven't commented that you see this course evolving into a more, collaboratively authored sort of thing as it goes forward, but more author controls, which is interesting. But the other thing that I'm interested in, particularly because of this audience, is, at what point suddenly does there become a role for the publisher? Because what the publishers have always done is, recruited all those authors to write all those chapters and all those big textbooks, and created a viable product there. I'm not saying that this ought to result in a book, but I'm saying that this could be a next generation sort of thing that actually does have some commercial potential or a role for the publisher in that process.
Yeah, and on the peer stuff, I apologize. I mean, with the crowdsourcing, clearly the conversations are such that I could never do that alone, and the ratings of the conversation comments to the top of the high quality kinds of points that students make and professionals make is really valuable. Plus, a lot of people afford case materials. I crowdsourced a lot of things that people added to the class, where I said, gee, it'd be neat to see cases in this, and they generated them because there were so many. All you need is one or two that are eager, and they do that. The other thing is translation. Quite a few of the students formed their own groups and said, hey, we need Spanish. Well, I don't speak Spanish very well. So the translation of the materials into Spanish or having study groups of that sort, it actually becomes crowdsourced, which is kind of remarkable. And if it keeps going with the same material year after year, we're going to probably just download that, keep it in the course section, and reuse it. So I think there are potentials of that collaborative peer contribution that go well beyond what I could ever afford or what the TAs. And then we need to figure out ways to kind of capitalize on it.
I just wanted to add that a little bit of an aside. This is the third forum in the course of a month that I've been in where there has been this discussion of what is the relationship between the MOOC and the textbook, and there's a growing sense that I'm definitely getting a sense that people are seeing synergies, and exactly where that synergy falls is definitely not decided yet. But does the MOOC become the textbook? Does the textbook support the MOOC? Does the MOOC support the textbook? How do the two interact? I'm seeing a real sense that there is some relationship there, and exactly how that relationship grows is the open question.
Just to add something to Bill's question about the effort and the creation, something I came across this morning, I'll try and tweet it a bit later on. There's a report out about Georgia Institute of Technology doing a low-cost master's course for 10,000 students over the next 3 years. They're going to charge the students $6,630 to do the course. They're paying the professors $30,000, okay, for course preparation and doing that. Yeah. A couple of other interesting things, which is a couple of other interesting things actually that struck me in listening to this about the almost complete change in value chain that's going on here. There will be a new category of administrator, the course assistant, who will be paid. The teaching assistants will also be professionals who will be paid. They won't be using graduate students. They're getting funding from AT&T, $2 million. And it's being done, who's it being done with? I think it's being split with, I think it's Coursera, but don't quote me on that. But the split in year one is $240K between Georgia and the MOOC. Only $15,000 in year two, but then amazingly $4.7 million according to the business plan in year three. Okay, I'll try and put that piece of information out there afterwards, but it's quite an interesting article and well worth reading in terms of looking at the numbers.
Great. Kent Anderson, JBJS. We have two of the best brands in education up here, Stanford and Georgetown. It doesn't seem to me that the brands are going to be disrupted. I don't think the University of Central Florida is a threat to either one of your brands because of MOOCs. So exactly, I wanted to get opinions up there with the question of Christensen disruption. Who exactly is disrupting whom in MOOCs?
We made a pact at the beginning of this panel that we weren't going to address provost-level policy questions on MOOC disruption on education. I think what we wanted to focus on more particularly was, content issues, IP issues, things that are relevant to scholarly publishing. Although, that said, if anyone wants to take a stab at it.
If you want to do this under Chatham House rules, okay, where no one's going to hold it against you and nobody can attribute it directly, your thoughts on that would be most welcome.
Okay.
I've had some conversations good man, Dan, I've had some conversations leading up to this actually when this particular elephant in the room was orbiting around. I think it's just interesting to have a general high-level consideration of the question, if you are willing.
Yeah, well, for me, again, you're reaching a population you wouldn't normally reach. So for a Stanford, it's great because now, Berkeley's always claimed we teach the masses. Well, now I can teach masses too. It's not just elites, which is terrific, and it makes you feel like you do a service, which is valuable and morally kind of nice. On the other hand, I realize too in doing it that, if someone's going to take my course and license it and put out of work a community college professor or an Ohio State professor who teaches a huge lecture course, suddenly you do have issues, right? And then, so I think at the lower end of the market of community colleges, I think this is a serious kind of quandary, and particularly in universities where the budget's tight, and if professors are expensive, and if you get, even if they get 50% as much value for 1/100th the cost, you know, I mean, I think there are issues. So I think these are serious quandaries, and whether the quality of the presentation is up to par, I think you're right. So I mean, these are good questions to ask. I'm nowhere near a provost. I only go see him when I'm in trouble, which is never. So I don't fully know the ramifications, but I think it's important to think about it.
So it's interesting what you said, though, is exactly the opposite of Christensen's sense disruption. It's not disruptors coming up through a value chain. It's somebody with a high value chain position driving out lower-end competitors. So just wanted to make that note.
I think that's a point Clay Shirky made. He wrote an article on his blog. I think it's called Napster and Udacity. Is that that's the article, saying that the people that aren't going to suffer are going to be the Stanfords and the Georgetowns of this world, or the Oxford universities. They're going to be the middle of the road, semi-anonymous centre of learning. So that's an interesting thing to consider. The only thing I would say to that is, in the UK we have former polytechnics, okay, that were supposed to be middle of the road, semi-anonymous places where you just went to get an education. And those institutions have proved to be spectacularly successful at running themselves as businesses, okay? So let's not count out those middle of the road colleges. They might have some very, very smart people in them.
Yes, thank you. Robert Harrington at the American Mathematical Society. Actually, my question is perhaps less about publishing, more about the future of MOOCs themselves. And I'm not sure on the panel who to address it to, so I'll just say panel. There's clearly a high attrition rate, and MOOCs seem, from everything I've read and listening to you, wonderful for highly motivated students. But what about students that are perhaps less motivated? I remember being one of those, and also perhaps students that lack self-confidence. Where is the place for human interaction? I feel like education, part of the role of education is to bring those students along, not just those who are highly motivated. And I'm just curious to know where you think MOOCs fit into that scenario.
I could try to answer this one with some of the participation data that we've collected. And maybe this correlates, maybe it doesn't, but it's an interesting data point. Dan was saying his last count, 81,000 students in the course. And what we were seeing in terms of active students, you know, engaging, Dan can speak to how many were engaging on his platform, discussing things in the forums, handing assignments. On our side as well, we were seeing how many people were actually coming in, downloading the free materials, as well as downloading, excuse me, downloading the paid materials. And it could be that, the power of the internet gives those shy students the ability to go in, touch the subject matters they care about, do the learning they need, take away. My personal view is any learning, even if it's not the complete course, is still good learning. It still improved you as a person, bettered you for society in some capacity. So even if we see attrition, we see engagement, active engagement from the content side for like that 5 to 10%. Dan can speak more to how many people he saw talking to each other in the forums. And I'm sure there are a lot of students out there that saw the lectures, read the notes, and didn't participate in the forums because they were shy. And I think those are all positives.
So the general rule is about 5% of registered students complete all of the materials in the course, which is not huge, but then you have to think most of these people, there's no cost to register. It's anonymous, so shy people do come on, more so than they would otherwise. And, access, it's all about scaling up access in many ways. So by doing this, that's what's happening. And people dabble. So my in-laws, for example, took the course and downloaded some of the materials, but did they go to every lecture? No. And so I think that's the kind of thing that's different. I also think it's a different kind of moral, in a classroom you feel compelled to participate, you feel compelled to listen to other people. Online, these people are very self-motivated, self-interested, and it's a different kind of moral situation for learning, right, and different kind of context. So I think those things we haven't thought through a lot. But the attrition rate is huge. We're thinking of ways of sustaining involvement, and that's what most of the experimentation and efforts are at, is how do you keep people along? Because it all happens in the first week. After the first 2 weeks, you have pretty much a stable involvement, and that's kind of for most classes.
I can add just one thing, not even just from a publisher perspective, but I did a lot of research on this, preparing for this panel, and I read some anecdotes from classes where people were struggling, and they said that on the discussion boards, and these sort of like support groups formed where either like students locally said like, hey, come and meet me at a coffee shop, I'll help you study, like if you don't understand this, let's get together. So I think there is sort of an ability to do that. So even if you're a struggling student, if you're hopefully not too shy to not even say that or admit that, then I think there are ways that people are sort of bringing that sort of human contact or like sort of a little bit of extra help. I don't know if it'll like work for all sort of students who need really remedial sort of help or a lot of one-on-one tutoring, but it seems like there are some cases where sort of a community gets built up and there's a support system for some students that need extra help.
Hi. I had a question for you, Laura, about your open access experience.
Okay.
You mentioned that you haven't gone entirely open access. I was wondering what were your concerns going into the open access universe, and what expectations haven't yet been realized?
Can you repeat that last part? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
What were your concerns going into the open access universe, and what expectations haven't yet been realized?
Have not yet been realized?
Yeah.
I think what was interesting, I have to admit, when I first got approached by Franny, actually, with this prospect, we had talked a lot, like a lot of publishers, we talked about open access, we talked about, what we might do with our materials. We have a few instances at Georgetown where we've done this, like I think I mentioned we do some pretty intense language learning textbooks, and we do provide some multimedia materials, open access on our website, for example, but it's not huge amounts of material, but it's some of it. And so we've talked a lot about what we can do. It's a sustainability question, obviously. But I saw this as a great opportunity. On one hand, at first I was like, oh gosh, like 30,000 potentially maybe people like accessing our material for free. I was like, yikes, like what is that going to mean? But we had a lot of really productive conversations about this, and I thought it was really important to just try it and see what happens. And I think it also it's very individual. It's hard for me to sort of answer this question. And for each publisher, I think it's going to be different. It depends what kind of materials it is. It depends, are those materials really old? Are they new? Are they selling really well still? What kind of markets do you see that it's still selling in, or do you want to reach? And so I think it's kind of a more complicated question and might be more individual from publisher to publisher, but I just really felt strongly that it was something we should try and see what happens. And we're open to experimenting a little bit and seeing where it goes, but I think it is kind of a Wild West situation right now. So I hope that's okay.
Hi, I'm Joe Esposito. We obviously here are in the very earliest stages of MOOCs, and we don't know where they're going to develop. But if you start to think out a little bit down the road, I wonder if the MOOCs are going to look more like a Facebook or an Apple, in that they will have these enormous user bases, and there will only be a small number of services providing these MOOCs.
I'm not catching all of the questions just because of the echo effect. Is there some way we can... Are you guys hearing me?
Yeah, it's a little hard to hear the question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Can you repeat it, please?
I'll try that again. How's that? Is that okay?
I think so, yeah.
Thanks, John.
Okay. We're obviously in the early stages of MOOCs. My question is, as MOOCs develop, and if we are in a situation where there are just a handful of service providers for MOOCs, perhaps Coursera and Udacity and one other, it would seem to me that the MOOCs would begin to resemble organizations like Facebook or Apple, which is to say you have an enormous user base and just a few choke points getting access to them. In such an environment, is it likely the content providers will be paid, or is it not more likely the content providers will have to pay for placement? That's the situation you have in the consumer internet in general. It is certainly the situation where you have in mass retail, where you have in supermarkets, for example, things like slotting allowances. So I would think that the opportunity for publishers with MOOCs is rather limited despite all the data, because there seems to be a tremendous imbalance of the power in the marketplace.
I can give a couple of thoughts here. And I think, you know, and obviously this is all crystal ball gazing, but I think that professors have an enormous amount of power in this space. Here's Dan's surprise face. Like, in some sense, they are the doctor prescribing the drug, and the patient is your captive audience that will take whatever drug is being prescribed. So in this case, you know, once the content is chosen, I think that next I can't answer your question right now about whether or not publishers will have to pay to play in this new space. I don't know what the answer to that is. It's a very hard question. There's too many variables in it. But I do know that if some content is selected for a particular course, I think in this kind of higher education setting, there is that stigma that faculty is king, and that there's academic independence, and what they want to teach and what they believe is going to best educate their students, they are best placed to prescribe. So, you know, once the selection of the content is set, I think that next conversation with publisher and saying, you know, this is very high chance of getting in if you can make it accessible enough, if you can make it reasonable enough and easy enough, that will determine whether or not, I think that is the question that will determine whether or not a publisher has to pay to play.
I'll just add, I also don't know the answer about how to pay to play. It's really difficult to say. But I can say that I have already been involved in conversations around trying to ensure that faculty who are creating MOOC content aren't being tied to an individual platform provider, and it's, you know, it's trying to make sure that the relationships between the platform providers and the faculty and the publishers are such that the ability to move that content from one platform to another is not too strict. So I don't think the question is being answered, but it's certainly being asked and debated and discussed.
Right, and with the 3 platforms you saw, Coursera's private, but they don't own my course. I can move it, I can take my email list where I want. With edX, it's nonprofit, right? So they're not going to probably use it for profitable. I mean, although universities are looking for ways to license and to deal with some kind of profit model, profit sharing with people. And then Udacity owns the course. So a lot of us, once you teach it there, it's theirs, which is kind of a strange situation for a lot of faculty. So there are different kind of models, and it's not clear which one's terrific, but in terms of enormous user base, it's mostly Coursera with the most users, the most courses, and more of a standardized format. And so, I mean, I could see easily, like I teach a course on organizations, right? So I don't know how many of you publishers have books for MBA classes for organizational behavior. You probably do. What if you had a little banner flag that showed up on my course page every week that said, hey, if you're interested in readings for organizations, come click this button. That's kind of a possible, I would think, market of sorts that would get you at least kind of stragglers that want to have supplemental readings, and there probably will be quite a few. So I mean, I think there's possibilities beyond what I prescribe. Plus, the students talk about other readings on the forums. So it's not just me and I change up the readings, and there's going to be other courses on organizations. So once it's saturated, you'll have lots of these little microcosms of advertising and relevant selections of materials. So.
Actually, at the back, yep, been waiting very, very patiently. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Barnaby Hughes, and I'm a graduate student in Library and Information Science at San Jose State University. So I'm coming at this from a student perspective as well as a library perspective. And I'm surprised at the absence of a student perspective in this panel. I like the different perspectives, but it would be interesting to get that student perspective as well. If you have any questions about the student perspective, come see me anytime during this. I have taken some MOOCs in addition to my classes. At San Jose, if you didn't know, at least in the library program, it is online mostly. So I'm already used to an online distance learning education model. And that's made me get very creative in terms of using library resources. So I often go to my local public library since I can't go to San Jose in order to get my books. I don't live in San Jose or anywhere near. And I'm very interested in what you were talking about in terms of the cost of materials. It seems to strike me as contrary to the spirit of the MOOC by charging for materials or expecting students in a MOOC to pay for them, since it is open. And by doing that, it would seem to close that and set up barriers. I think it's very interesting what SIPEX is doing, but I wonder if anyone has thought about partnering with the Open Library Project to allow students to find access to those materials in their own local libraries. So just a few comments, questions. Thanks.
So we didn't require any readings for purchase. We made it optional. And the argument was that most of the international students, and yes, Coursera, it's all free. And the question was, well, if they were at Stanford in my class, we would assign these readings. So we tried to find free readings. We tried to find a lower cost. And to offer them as many cases we could for free and not expect them to do those readings was the assumption of the online course. Now, of course, other people want to get closer to kind of a rich experience, so that then those texts do matter. And, you know, I kind of was of the mind it's not sustainable, at least for me, to work for free. And so the knowledge production, whether it could come to a cost that was more reasonable for the students that wanted that deeper experience or not, was why we approached SIPEX, to think of ways that could at least provide them greater access than would have been otherwise. We did think about the student. Another thing about the student experience was whether it is as enriching online as it is in person, and whether flipped classes really work that well. And one of the things I can tell you is for Stanford students, they don't particularly like flipped classes in the sense that I've given away the knowledge for free, and here they're paying $6,000 for a class with me, and a lot of the materials given to the world already for free. Even if they have this interactive experience and they network with each other, there's still an issue about, well, you gave it away. And so there is this kind of tension, even with very liberally minded students, that, you know, how is this an elite experience when it's given away? So we do have these kind of concerns, and we haven't figured it out yet. We're trying to study the student experience as well, and what enriches it, makes it better. And I think a lot of the challenges that students feel with the online environment, a lot of people are adapting the online environment to have groups, to have collaborative experiences, to have proctored kinds of, they're adjusting and adapting to that to create a richer experience. So even the classroom experience, I think, ultimately online will get better and better, is the scary part a little bit, and whether that replaces an actual classroom situation, I don't know, but I think it's short-sighted to think that it wouldn't ever. So, yeah.
Okay, we are almost completely out of time, so are you quick?
Yes, quick
Fantastic,
question.
go
Right.
ahead.
We've talked a lot about values, or we've heard a lot about values to the different players in MOOCs, from the originators materials provided to courses and a satisfaction for the students. But in most education, there's some form of recognition, be it a certificate at one end or a 2-1 degree or higher at the other end. What recognition and the value is there? How do you see the courses being recognized, and how do you see those recognitions being of value to the holders of, let's call them tokens? Just an open question.
I don't know. I mean, I can only speak from, again, like I did a fair amount of research on this, and I mean, this is still very much up for debate. I have heard like I believe some universities in Colorado are actually accepting some MOOC classes for credit, and I'm blanking on the name of like, there's a huge educational association in America like that has also said we're going to start validating these classes, essentially vetting them and saying like if a student completes these, we as the association would support like this as a viable class to substitute for a similar introductory class at any university in the United States, for example. So there's like a lot of talk of that, and I think that's ongoing, and I think it really depends on the type of from institution to institution what they would accept. I think it also depends on really the quality of the MOOC too. I mean, obviously, like I think a lot of institutions want to make sure that they're vetted in some way, that this is a class that will actually take the place of something they could have taken at the university, either for free or for a fee. But I think what I see a lot of is like this freemium sort of stuff, this upgrade, like you can take the class open and freely, but if you want to actually, for example, there's a big problem with not being able to know if the actual student did the actual work, like if there's a final exam or a paper to turn in. So some of these, I've heard some of the course providers are saying, well, we could provide on-site sort of proctoring of exams, and you pay, as a student, you pay like a $30 fee to be able to go somewhere, have your identity verified, take the final exam, and actually get a certificate that says, I did this work as this student. So I think there's a lot of things in the works that people are talking about, because this being totally open and online creates sort of problems in our usual systems, and I think they're sort of trying to work that out. And there's lots of, I think, interesting ideas floating out there.
Yeah, what I can tell you is currently the certificate that I give just says Coursera, and that I'm a Stanford professor that said they completed the course, and whether there's an advanced or basic track, like with honors or something. And I do know that a lot of people put it on their LinkedIn page and their CV already, which is surprising. But on the other hand, I also know that Coursera has developed automated means of proctoring online, where they can do, you can identify someone by their keystroke pace and how they use a keyboard.
Really?
You can also identify people through that little camera online and do facial recognition to some extent, and they're doing various things like that, plus automatic plagiarism detection, a variety of things that make it as accurate as proctored in a classroom. So, and most of the things that they're going to use it for initially will be something like the rudiment. Every organization has sexual harassment training, right? So if you're a manager, you have to take this course every couple of years, and if you do it online, boom, if it's a MOOC, and you've got that done and you proctor online, it's a great way to kind of have repetition on that kind of thing. So I think there's going to be mostly that initially, plus like Algebra 2, which might be required for access to a college, certain courses that a lot of people just don't want to teach in a lot of places. Will be the ones that are most utilized for this kind of credential and for credit. But otherwise, you're not going to see it for training surgeons, right? For like whether someone trained by a MOOC in surgery is probably not who you want to utilize. So there's going to be, or even for advanced degrees. So like for a sociologist, I would be a little suspicious for a PhD that they took all MOOCs. So I think there's certain things you won't see it for a while that just aren't feasible, but it may be true for a variety of things that you have this kind of credentialed aspect.
I do want to give a quick shout out to Georgetown has an online nursing program. I found out about this too, and like surgery I don't know about, but what happens is they take most of the classes online, and then in their local area they do sort of practical, sort of clinical stuff. And I thought that was really interesting, and they've been doing it for a while now. So just throwing that out there. I'm not saying I would want a surgeon to do that, but.
Brilliant. Okay, before we do all the applause and that stuff, don't forget we are incredibly full here for this conference, so get to your next session early. Don't leave it too late or you'll be standing up. Brilliant talks, brilliant questions, thanks to you.
Yeah.
Give them all a round of applause. Thank you.
I have an hour. Yeah.